Wednesday morning class that shall not be named, as we're going to study some really interesting topics today, namely the topic of Jews and alcohol. So I'm going to now record on Cloud. Welcome everybody to our Wednesday class that shall not be named. Our topic today is, of course, alcohol and Judaism, which is a really strange but interesting topic because obviously we'll talk about biblically, historically, and we'll talk about the world of alcohol and how in some places Jews actually dominated it. So how many of us are familiar with the history of Jews and alcohol? And I'm not as familiar with the history of Jews in the alcohol business. Ron is. I know we talked a little bit about the Ukrainians and how. And Ron, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I want to just say that Jews and alcohol go way back into the what do they call it, your grandmother? Speakeasy days.
And we'll look into that as well.
Arlene's grandmother and grandfather were very involved in that.
Really, and I want her to talk about that a little bit. We may switch to Jews and the mafia as well, and have talk about that as well, because I didn't go in that route here, but we'll talk about a little bit of that with the Brofmans and that kind of stuff. But let's go over a little bit about Jews and alcohol just in general, historically, and then we'll talk about the business of it as well. So Jews are allowed to drink alcohol. We know this. Islam has gone the other way. We haven't. So as we know, the stereotype is that you go into the cabinet and all the alcohol has dust on it in the Jewish home, gifts from various events, never used, and will be passed down to the next generation in full. Only opened when the Goyim come to visit. And that is the stereotype that I was raised with. I don't know if all of you were raised with the same stereotype, but certainly it was very true where I came from, at least openly, that, when you went to parties and stuff, there was very little alcohol. Now, we know that is not necessarily
the truth.
But that is certainly a stereotype, and in certain places it probably was accurate, and in other places it wasn't. And so we'll go and look a little bit first at the history of Jews, going to the earliest of our history. As we know, alcohol is in the Bible, and as we also know, there is a dichotomy of a view of alcohol, or a two-sided view, when it comes to what we're supposed to do and what we're not supposed to do. So as we know, there is a plenty of places in the Bible, in the Talmud, in Jewish tradition, in which we are told to drink alcohol. When we're told most famously on Passover, you're supposed to drink 4 glasses of wine. But we also know that Havdalah, we drink wine. The Sabbath, we drink wine. At a wedding, there's wine in the ceremony. Pidyon Haben, redemption of the firstborn, there is wine. There's 7 food blessings in Judaism, 7 blessings for food before you eat. But one of them is just for wine. So we have a specific blessing just to drink alcohol that we use all the time. There's even a special word when we drink from alcohol. What do we say? We say l'chaim. There's a word for us to use. We see alcohol is used in the Bible at the temple for various sacrifices. We see that Esther goes to a party and asks her husband to save the Jews during a party when they're drinking. And one of the reasons probably that the king acquiesces is because he's a little tipsy after, having a party he has a lot of parties. We see alcohol is mentioned many times in the Bible, wine especially, but other forms of alcohol are also mentioned. It is not a banned substance in any place that we can see. On Purim, you're supposed to get so drunk that you don't know the difference between Haman and Mordecai. So we have a lot of instances that say, hey, drinking is okay. Not only that, it is celebration. Wine is considered a drink of celebration, of meaning. And so it's used all over the place. It's in biblical literature everywhere. They mention beer, obviously, that's also done. But, wine is certainly used all over the place. It's for sacrificial events, for the offerings of the fruits at the temple, the Jewish holidays. So that is there. It's used when we meet with non-Jews. Melchizedek, the famous prophet who Abraham meets with, they share bread and wine. There are edicts in the Bible to say you're supposed to plant and cultivate grapes so that you can have wine. It says so in Psalms. So it's everywhere. So we are allowed to drink wine. We're supposed to celebrate not only wine, alcohol. It's okay. Remember, they didn't have cars. However, on the other side of the coin, there are plenty of, not prohibitions on the overall use of wine, but there's prohibitions for certain people. And there is, whenever you give anything, there's when you talk about medicine, nowadays when they advertise medicine on the TV or on the computer, what do they have to say at the end? All the side effects. They get the fast talkers. And that's what we have in the Bible as well, because there are plenty of explanations as to when and when you should not drink wine. Who is the first person to drink wine in the Bible that we see?
Noah.
Noah. Good job, Larry. Gets drunk, plants a vine afterwards, gets drunk. The end of the world. Obviously, who's not going to get drunk over that?
Mhm.
There's a belief in Judaism that stereotype that Jews don't drink is nothing more than a stereotype, that we're just as susceptible. And the statistics of people in similar economic social groups, we are the same as most. And so we have the same issues as everybody. We see problems with alcohol. Some say that the tree of knowledge that Adam and Eve ate from they're getting drunk on grapes. Lot gets drunk and sleeps with his daughters because they think the world's ended. Aaron's two sons are killed for sacrificing probably while they were drunk, because there's a very specific law that says priests cannot sacrifice on behalf of the people when they are drunk. There's other things. If you want to be a Nazirite just for a short amount of time, take a vow, you're not supposed to touch alcohol. And then there's plenty of places in the Bible and the Talmud where it teaches us not to be too enamored with alcohol. In Proverbs, do not mix with wine bibbers or glutinous eaters of meat, for drunkards and gluttons become poor, and drowsiness clothes them in rags. Woe to those who rise early in the morning to run after their drinks, who stay up at night till they are inflamed with wine. They have harps and lyres at their banquets. What?
Where is that from? Is that in the Torah?
This is in the Torah.
Oh,
Proverbs, really? Isaiah. There's plenty of places where we see the issues, and the Talmud also. So Judaism teaches us that these are celebratory drinks, that you can get a little tipsy and enjoy yourself. There's even a belief spiritually that when you drink a little bit, the Spirit of God can enter you more because your walls are down, so to say. So drinking is something that is celebrated, but it's also feared because they know that some people overdrink and can't handle it. So it's a balance between being able to celebrate and having fun and addiction and gluttony, which is combined with gluttony and alcohol. It's the overdoing something. There's
Rabbi,
even a book called the Sefer HaTikun from the 19th century, which says one is required to make a toast when he builds a house, sells a house, and when his house burns down. One must make a toast when he gets married. If the groom is a widow, he must drink for each wife. An elderly man who marries someone, a young woman, must drink 49 toasts. If the father of the bride refuses to drink a toast, the couple must divorce. And the Polish Hasidim are accustomed to beating the recalcitrant father with his own slipper. That is a sarcastic book. That's, it's one of these joke type books that bases itself on the Shulchan Aruch from the 19th century, one of these comedies. But, there are books on it. There's a very well-known book, Yankel's Tavern, Jews, Liquor, and the Life in the Kingdom of Poland, which is a satire on Jews in alcohol business in Poland. And that is so alcohol has been part of our world for a very long time, but we also acknowledge the ill effects and the problems. I, as a rabbi, deal with it all the time, much more than I should, because it's such an issue. As we know in our world, alcohol and drug addiction is a very, very big problem. People stereotype that, we don't have it, but the truth is everybody has it. The only difference is if you're wealthier, you can afford better drugs and better alcohol. And if you're not as wealthy, you have less expensive alcohol and drugs. That's the only difference. And so it's one of those things that we're supposed to celebrate, but we also know there are certain people who are prone to addiction. And so our congregation is one of the founding congregations for the local recovery and addiction organization that unites the different houses of worship. So we're a picture perfect example of the proper way to use alcohol, at least religiously. You celebrate with it, but you be careful to make sure people don't get addicted. If they are, you look for treatment. Larry.
Yeah, I know you'd mentioned this last time with Purim. I meant to ask you about that exhortation for not drinking until you're drunk and not recognizing the difference between Haman and Mordecai. What is the reason behind that? That doesn't seem to make sense.
Well, again, Purim is the traditional fun holiday. It is the holiday where it is not a major holiday. There's no restrictions for work. Hanukkah takes over from it later. It's a biblical holiday, but it's just pure fun. And this is like the, Halloween.
But the idea of not recognizing the difference between good and evil, it just kind of it seems a little unusual.
Well, I think it's not trying to recognize good and evil and what you're going to do. It's just the point of saying you're letting down your defenses so you're ready to have fun, so you don't know what's going on. But it's not meant to be as an example of I should now misbehave. It's just the idea that you're supposed to have fun. Purim has become less a holiday of meaning and more of a holiday of enjoy yourself. And that's what that holiday. So the reason for this is they didn't want Purim to become a major holiday. It was supposed to be a fun holiday, but it's not in the Torah. And it's a very strange holiday. And the heroine is a woman, and the bad guy is center stage. And so they think they wanted to make it more fun less essential in terms of religion and more just like, let's go out there and just, but again, understanding the biblical passages that, if you get a little tipsy once in a while, it's not a bad thing. But if you're doing it all the time, it is a terrible thing. So it's one of those two-sided coins. And it's going to be even more two-sided when we talk about Jews in the business. Ron.
Yeah, something that don't understand. On a holiday, say Passover, everybody gets Manischewitz wine. And my question is this: is there anything in other wines that you can't drink for Passover?
Not at all. So that's another thing we'll talk about a little bit is Passover says you drink wine. Manischewitz has just become the wine of choice in Mogen David, but you don't have to drink any of it. I mean, you never have to drink Manischewitz. There are no rules for that. It's just the most popular brand. There are really, kashrut does not have any connection with wine because obviously grapes are kosher. If you're if you're making alcohol, you're not sticking pork or milk in there or shrimp. It's just grain alcohol. So automatically it's kosher for all the alcohols because you're not using any products that would make it unkosher, not mixing milk and meat. So wine inherently, alcohol even more so, is inherently kosher. However, in the modern world especially, we have gone to another level of kosher, and that is inspection of the vineyard, going into the distillery or whatever you call the place where they make wine and checking to make sure the barrels that nobody has brought, has been eating pork and dropped it in one of the barrels. So, making sure insecticides are kosher. So you can bring it to another level of kashrut. Now, even when it comes to whiskey and distilled, even that is like super kosher because the whole process just makes it extra kosher no matter what. But you still have people go in and make it kosher. Sometimes it's just financially because, you have to pay these people to get the kosher stamp. And sometimes it's a little bit more involved. But inherently, alcohol is kosher. So if you're drinking a non-kosher wine, it doesn't mean there's pork. It just means there wasn't a rabbi or somebody watching as it was done. They didn't clean the facility in a certain way.
So for kosher for Pesach, then is that an additional step then when they put in the
Right.
after?
Kosher for Passover is an additional step. Now, alcohol is not inherently kosher for Passover. Some is. Wine is inherently kosher for Passover because it's grapes. But for Passover, there's even more because you have to do you can be, let's say, in your distillery. I mean, in your, what do you call the wine place where you make the wine?
Winery.
Winery. And there's another word I think, but if you have bread in there, it is not kosher for Passover. So you have to go and clean it out to make it kosher for Passover. The same sweeping thing, extra cleaning to make it kosher for Passover. That's a whole different level. Now, alcohol can be not non-kosher for Passover because some alcohols are made with grain. And, grain to be used on Passover has to be used in a different specific way. So the fermenting process is not allowed. So certain alcohols are inherently unkosher. Anything basically with grain. Beer is the most obvious. But so there are specific ones that are obviously inherently kosher for Passover. Vodka, tequila, anything that is plant-based or potato-based but they will still have to go in and clean it in a specific way to make it kosher for Passover. But some people, it doesn't make a difference. Some people will say, I'm going to have, vodka no matter what for Passover. It doesn't be kosher because it's potato and it's, but others would say it has to be a little bit more observed. So
actually, this is a surprise. Most vodka is not potato based.
Really, what's it based on?
You actually have to look for it. And
I did
And
not know that. What's it usually based on? Is it grain?
it's there's some grain in it. There's some wheat in it. My wife is gluten intolerant.
Wow.
And
So that would make it unkosher then.
so we look, we buy a bottle every 5 years, but the
Because you're the
point is,
stereotype.
huh?
You're the stereotype.
Yeah. Well, not quite 5 years, but anyway, we know a couple of brands of vodka that are gluten free, and there's one brand that Tito's actually is kosher for Passover. They actually have a Hester on it.
And I think I even think I was reading up on the history of that. So we may get to that as well.
Yeah. So anyway, it's a misconception. Now maybe if you got good Russian vodka,
Maybe 150 years ago, it was all like that. Yeah,
Yeah.
there's certain alcohol that does not have grain, and
Yeah.
that's the one that can become kosher more easily. But yeah, I'm not specific. I don't drink enough to know the difference between them. But so when you go to somebody's house who keeps very strict kosher for Passover, you'll see kosher wine, and then you may see kosher schnapps or kosher other things as well, depending on where they are, what they drink, and where that.
Rabbi, in the Muslim religion, I know this is not a class on, on Muslim, but there's a prohibition against alcohol. Do you know why that is?
Well, it's the obvious. I mean, obviously, it's what we just talked about.
They're taking it to the next step, that it's bad even for celebratory versions
Exactly.
as well.
Yeah.
It's not a statement to separate themselves from Jews or other religions, or
I don't think so. I don't think it said that at all, because certainly you can, there are Jews who don't drink as well, and so I think it's just basically it takes the mind away from honoring God, from remembering God. It's the intoxication. It can lead to making mistakes with what you eat. It can lead you to eat pork. That's what I think it's all about.
were there any warnings against things like what we now call hallucinatory drugs or vegetables that that at the time would cause?
There's a little bit in the Talmud on it. Yes, there is a little bit, but not that much, because I don't think it was such an issue. But it is referred to as another intoxicant, yeah. But it's not as big as, not as mentioned as often as alcohol. But yeah, it did, in the Talmud, it does talk a little bit about drugs. Obviously, it's not like today where it's so popular. So we have the technology. But yeah, there's more than a little bit on it. So let's go into a little bit now on business. Because as you know, I am business-minded in everything I do. So we mentioned it slightly or touched on it previously, that there is a very specific rule in Judaism, an unwritten rule, that Jews are most successful in open countries that have very few limitations, that are educated, like America. So if you're a Jewish person, you go to an open and educated society, or a society that appreciates education, you're going to do well. That's kind of the rule of all time, but really applicable to the modern age, because most of us live in Western countries. The other rule for Jews moving around is that what type of business do Jews go into? There is one rule, and one rule alone, as to which business you go into, and that is you go into whatever business you're allowed to go into. That's it. That's the rule. You can sell pigs. You can raise pigs. If that's the job, your skill, you have opportunity, you can do it. You don't eat the pig, but you can raise them and sell them. There may be a rule about only selling them to non-Jews, but whoever actually keeps that rule. So when it comes to alcohol, that is the exact same rule for us. When did Jews go into the alcohol business? When?
They were allowed to.
They were allowed to. That's it. That's the only reason Jews went into the business. It wasn't for a special affinity for alcohol. It wasn't because they enjoyed the taste, which probably they did. They went into the alcohol business because it became an area in which Jews were allowed. What's the most famous business Jews were allowed to enter into in Eastern Europe? It was, of course, money lending. That was the most famous because there were prohibitions against it in the Christian world. In some places, there were similar prohibitions with alcohol. And also, alcohol may have been looked at as a low-class business that respectable people didn't go into. And who were not respectable? Us. And so we have, I'm just saying from their perspective, so this opened up, and Ukraine is the most obvious example. We'll talk about that in a second because the numbers are off the charts in certain areas of Eastern Europe. But this is why Jews very early on went into the distributing alcohol business. Now, what's also interesting is because for a while, it was almost a monopoly. And that is a really strange thing because it really became a big thing in Poland in the 17th and 18th century. But before that, obviously, landowners at times realized they could make more money if their grain was used for alcohol than if it was used for bread. And so they decided to, thanks Katie, to go into that field. And they knew Jews were good at business. They knew this was not a reputable business. And so they went into partnership with Jews, and eventually Jews would buy up a lot of it. And at one point, it is believed that 85%, excuse me one second.
How much longer is your class?
Till 30 minutes.
30 minutes.
Is it an emergency?
No.
Okay.
We're just trying. We forgot that you have this class that goes to 11:30.
Okay. Okay. So